Everyone, and thank you for joining us. This is the third session of the Justice Futures seminar. My name is Milena Tripkovic, and I am a senior lecturer at the Edinburgh Law School and also one of the associate directors of the SECJR. And it's my immense pleasure to welcome today two speakers from the University of Warwick, Henrique Carvalho and Anna Chamberlen. So I will just briefly introduce both of them, and I'll just maybe say a couple of sentences about the topic that they will be presenting today. So Henrique Carvalho is professor of law and also a co-director of the Center for Critical Legal Studies at the University of Warwick. In 2017, he published a book of the preventive turn in criminal law for the Oxford University Press. And more recently, he has co-authored with Anna Chamberlen a book questioning punishment, which is the book they will be talking about today. Currently, Henrique uses cultural theory, aesthetics, and narratology to critically analyze criminalization and punishment. And within that particular context and particular interest, he's currently working on a project called Just Sentences, Narrating and Rewriting Criminal Law's Aesthetic Injustice. And he's doing this project as part of his mid-career fellowship with the British Academy. And our second speaker will be Anna Chamberlen, who is professor of sociology and also a co-director of the Center for the Study of Women and Gender at the University of Warwick. Anna, in 2018, published a book embodying punishment, emotions, identities, and lived experiences in women's prisons, also for the Oxford University Press. And as I said, she has recently co-authored the book presented today. So currently, she looks at her research looks at creativity, art making, and belonging in prison. And she's also the main coordinator and co-founder of the International Justice Arts Network, which is linked or which arose from her AHRC-funded project called Captive Arts. So welcome to both of the speakers. I'm very happy to be chairing this session because I really, really enjoy the work of both Anna and Henrique. So today they will be presenting some of the key findings and some of the main themes of their book, Questioning Punishment, which came out in 2024 for Routledge. This is a very interesting book in the sense that it questions some of the main assumptions that we have about punishment. It basically questions this idea of punishment as being the logical and necessary response to criminal offending. And there are a number of key different themes that they explore in this book. I found particularly interesting from their short description, short abstract of this book, the kind of the some of the key themes that they develop. One is of the phenomenon of hostile solidarity, and the other one is what they term a lived sense of justice. So I think these two things will probably appear in your presentation, and we are very much looking forward to hearing your presentation. So just to explain, the authors will take about 20-25 minutes to present their book, and after that we will have a Q&A session. You're more than welcome to just raise your hand on Zoom, or if you feel like it, you can also use the chat option. I will monitor the chat and then ask the authors to respond to the questions. So if you are both ready, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Milena, and thank you everyone for being here and to the organizers for the invitation. So what I will do is I will try and summarize the book for about 10 or so minutes, and then Henrique will come in and talk about the last chapter of the book and about some more recent work that we have developed after finishing Questioning Punishment and after the publication of the book. So this book is the culmination of over a decade of collaborative writing and research that we have been doing, there's a series of papers that I guess precede the book, where we had started thinking about the role of punishment in our sort of social lives, and we sought with the book to rethink kind of the hegemonic status of punishment in our lives through particularly kind of the lens of the prison as a very concrete image of punishment, but also sought to broaden that idea of punishment onto other settings as well. So we started off with the questions that you see on the screen, and perhaps this might be familiar sort of questions to many of you in the Zoom call today. We were kind of particularly keen to rethink some of those questions that are taken for granted in thinking around punishment. So why is it that we feel we need punishment, particularly given the significant empirical evidence that shows that it is failing in many regards? Why do we take it for granted? Why do we see it as natural, desirable, and necessary? So the book is structured around 6 central questions, and we've put them here on the slide as well. And these questions are designed to challenge punishment as both an institution and as a psychosocial phenomenon. So by investigating punishment through these lenses, we conclude that our contemporary reliance on punitive justice represents a pathological relationship with justice. With this pathology, while this pathology, we say, is deeply entrenched, we point towards the potential of a lived sense of justice, and that is, we explain it as an active, collective, and embodied practice that moves away from hostility towards social transformation. And Henrique will speak more to that aspect of the book later on. So the book's introduction opens by posing several riddles, as we call them, that challenge our basic social assumptions about punishment. So even when the media or politicians will focus on miscarriages of justice or on the volatility of prisons, the underlying premise is almost always that we still need punishment. So drawing on a body of work from critical social theory and critical criminology, and especially in that particular introductory part of the book, we draw from Foucault's work, we take issue with the fact that modern scrutiny around punishment rarely challenges the purpose of punishment, seeking only to punish better rather than to punish less or to completely rethink punishment altogether. So the primary goal of the book is to resist taking these problems for granted and to unsettle the idea that punitive justice is a commonsensical, rational, unavoidable necessity for social order. In terms of methodology, so we draw on a series of kind of recent and classic, we might say, scholarship around punishment, and we draw from David Garland's invitation to rethink punishment in a way that is sensitive to its many dimensions and inherent contradictions. So this is not just a legal or a philosophical inquiry, it's an interrogation of punishment as a concept, institutional practice, social phenomenon, and importantly for us, also as an affect and an interpersonal experience. By exposing the caveats and contradictions surrounding modern perspectives on crime control, we try to uncover what is normally invisibilized or repressed in official, especially legal narratives. Now, in terms of methodology, we partly consider also the widening of the net of penalties over the past 30 years, but we focus on the prison sentence as the paradigmatic form of modern punishment. We argue that even so-called softer penal options like fines or community sanctions, they are increasingly played out in a punitive major key, as Alan Norrie has put it, reflecting a contemporary over-reliance on the emotional satisfaction derived from punishment and seeking to express and publicly represent toughness and hostility. In the context of prisons, this is even more animated, obviously, where the trend towards hyper-incarceration and penal populism relies on hyperbolic yet very banal images. So barbed wire and austere cells are on one end, and tabloid misrepresentations of leisure and comfort inside prisons. This kind of competing images appear to the public to offer a not dehumanizing enough image while simultaneously maintaining an allure of security and severity. So a central point in the book's argument is that the true riddle, if you like, of punishment lies in its emotional dimension. And this is a kind of a direction we take methodologically throughout the whole book. We argue that those who support punishment, those who enact it, and of course those who endure it, all feel very strongly about it. While legal scholarship often tries to treat punishment as a purely rational or pragmatic reasoning, we argue that in its true power, if you like, lies in its affective purchase. Punishment is not just a response to a violation of the law, it is a manifestation of the urge to punish that is both driven by individual sentiments and conditioned by broader structural dynamics. So given this focus on emotions, we revisit Durkheim's theory that punishment reaffirms collective values. However, we argue that in our current social moment, a moment characterized by social fragmentation and extreme inequality, punishment produces a hostile kind of solidarity. This is an artificial sense of solidarity that is not built on concrete social conditions like welfare or recognition, but instead it relies on identification through estrangement. People are brought together not as a cohesive community, but as a community of aggressors united against the common other. So in a world defined by ontological insecurity and generalized anxiety, such as ours, punishment comes to act as a psychosocial defense mechanism. It offers two primary illusions, we suggest. First is the illusion of control, which allows people to focus on identifiable threats, in this case criminals, that they believe can be stopped even when the feedback about our methods being ineffective is clear. Second is the illusion of order, which provides a sense of orderliness, allowing individuals to believe that they live in a world where authority is fair and justice is neatly resolved. This mechanism allows us, anxious subjects, to repress our feelings of insecurity by projecting hostility onto others. So in this sense, we distinguish between those who are the targets of punishment, those who are punished, and those who are its subjects, as we call them. So while the poor and racialized communities are often the ones filling up our prisons, the real subjects we suggest of punishment are the law-abiding citizens whose anxieties are being managed through the ritual of punishment. This process functions as a scapegoating apparatus. Characteristics that should be recognized as factors of vulnerability, so for instance, poverty or trauma, are instead culturally articulated as markers of dangerousness to justify hostility and exclusion. And in the third chapter of the book, we engage with official and academic literature that shows that the penal system is in a state of perennial crisis. And this logic and notion and language of crisis is an ongoing sort of subject in prison studies and in the sociology of punishment. However, instead of delegitimizing punishment, this crisis allows punitive measures to retain their sense of urgency and desirability. This crisis reform nexus encourages the public to remain fixated on punishment, framing its failures as a reason to invest, not only economically but emotionally, even further in punishment. Here, we also emphasize that a key expression of punishment in this context is its focus on the infliction of pain. Even the etymology of the notion of punishment directly speaks to that notion of pain. A large body of work has already articulated that the experience of incarceration is fundamentally embodied. It scars self-identities and social relations of those punished long after the end of their sentences. And this pain-inflicting aspect, we suggest, is embedded in the design of punitive institutions. So while a big part of the book is centered around the prison as a key sort of representational image of punitiveness, which is a kind of a concept, a theoretical concept we try and unpack in the book also wants to explore punitive sentiments beyond criminal justice settings. So towards the end of the book, we kind of leave the prison and move on to some other contexts. Punitive logics have seeped, we suggest, into almost every sphere of contemporary social life. I would argue even within the university, and we can talk more about that later on if you want. But, in the realm of national security, prevention logics channel generalized vulnerability towards suspect communities. In migration policy, the hostile environment militarizes borders and treats refugees as threats to the so-called community of value. Under the logics of austerity, poverty and welfare dependency are reconstructed as personal failures requiring discipline and sanctions. So we argue that these diffuse punitive moments are indispensable to understanding punishment as a broader social phenomenon and sort of invite a wider reading of punitiveness beyond criminal justice contexts. We propose that punitiveness is best understood as a phenomenological complex. It is composed, we suggest, of four dimensions. And we have put them on the slide there. The subjective experience of fragile entitlement, the symbolic ritual of scapegoating, the ideological use of punitiveness as a governmental project to manage insecurity, and the structural reinforcement of domination. This complex allows the state to deny its impotence in the face of social problems by promoting an image of power and tough activity that appeals to an anxious public. So ultimately, and before I end my bit of the presentation, we hope that the book acts as a kind of an invitation to see punishment not as the answer to our social problems, but as a problem in itself. It's a problem deeply entrenched in our social lives, and it is a violent political project. We conclude that a comprehensive challenge to the violence of punishment requires us to face hurtful truths about our society and about what we see as our social shadow, neglected parts of ourselves that we project onto other people, hence the kind of the emphasis on the affective allure of punishment. By unlearning punitive common sense, we can begin hopefully to imagine a world where justice is a shared responsibility for building a fairer society rather than just a state monopoly on retribution. So I'll pass on to Henrique now, who will say a little bit more about the book's concluding chapter and then discuss a little bit about how our work has moved on to think about the notion of justice.
Hi, everyone. Before I start, just to say thank you so much for this invitation, and thanks to Milena for the very nice and generous introduction. So what I'll do now, I'll talk a little bit about the end of the book, so to speak, and then how we've used the conclusion of the book, so more or less to pave the way into current research that we're trying to develop now. So the last chapter of the book, which we called So What? The Pathology of Punishment and the Promise of Justice, serves as the concluding synthesis of the book's investigation into this multifaceted nature of punishment. In this chapter, which is based in an article that we published in 2022 in the Howard Journal of Crime and Justice, we move beyond the deconstruction of punitive common sense to address the critical implications of the findings, our findings. We argue that contemporary society's hegemonic reliance on punishment has fostered a pathological relation to justice, characterized by a compulsive, hostile, and immediatist approach to harm and wrongdoing. And to articulate this, we employ a metaphor comparing our attitudes towards justice to modern sensibilities regarding bodily pain, proposing a shift from seeing justice as an absent presence to recognizing it as a present absence that must be actively incorporated through a lived sense of justice. So we define the current state of justice in liberal democracy settings as pathological. So while society is obsessively concerned with justice, this engagement is driven by a persecutory position that focuses overwhelmingly on episodic instances of individual wrongdoing that demand a visible punitive response to specific violations of the social order. The pathology lies in the fact that this punitive drive acts as a psychosocial defense mechanism, as Anna explained before, right? So by identifying dangerous orders as the source of social pain, the punitive apparatus allows the law-abiding public to feel righteous and secure without ever having to engage with the structural and systemic roots of injustice, such as inequality, marginalization, legacies of oppression, and so on. So the core of the argument in this chapter rests on an analogy with the phenomenology brought forward from the phenomenology of embodiment, specifically drawing on the work of Drew Leader, who's an American philosopher of embodiment, health and illness, pain, and so on. In everyday life, the body disappears. Leader argues that we typically experience our bodies as an absent presence. So in everyday life, the body disappears from our consciousness as we take our corporeality for granted. We mainly become aware of our embodiment only during moments of dysfunction, disease, or pain. Lieder calls this primarily negative emergence disappearance, using this Greek prefix that means basically a bad form of appearance, a negative form of appearance. Similarly, we argue that justice operates as an absent presence in the contemporary social imaginary. We assume justice is already there, an inherent property of our civilized institutions and societies. Therefore, justice is mainly absent from a practical consciousness. It only primarily appears as a phenomenon negatively. That is, it only disappears into our collective consciousness when it is seen to fail, when it's violated. Whoops, sorry. This metaphor helps explain why our pursuit of justice is so frequently hostile. When a part of the body hurts, we experience it as other or as an alien presence that hurts us. This alienation justifies a hostile attitude towards the source of pain. We are willing to cut it out, whether that means extracting a tooth or even in extreme cases, amputating a limb in order to get rid of the pain. And punitive justice mimics this logic. It identifies wrongdoers as the alien presence in the social body that seeks to, and thus it seeks to scapegoat and remove them from marginalization, incarceration, or exclusion to restore a sense of social integrity. In this sense, our dominant orientation towards punitive justice can be characterized as a painkiller approach. Just as a painkiller numbs the symptom without curing the disease, punitive justice provides a temporary release by venting aggression, but it leaves the structural conditions of injustice untouched. This cycle leads to an addictive reliance on stronger doses of punishment as the underlying social illness persists. A significant implication of this pathology is the alienation of ordinary people from the practice of justice. Because justice is viewed as a state monopoly on retribution, individuals are cast as bystanders who only connect to justice through the telic demand for state action when they feel violated. Within the binary logic of punitiveness, the good citizen already has justice. Responsibility for justice is shifted entirely onto the state offenders and on those failed citizens and suspect communities who need to actively reassure others of their lawfulness, that they belong on the good side. This outlook is profoundly disempowering, as it discourages active political participation and collective deliberation on how to build a truly just world. To escape this pathological cycle, we propose reimagining justice as a present absence. This means acknowledging that concrete justice is currently lacking in our social world, and that we must actively and collectively search and seek for its actualization. We term this alternative a lived sense of justice, and we suggest it has three main characteristics. First, it's active instead of reactive. It's not mainly a response against violation, but it's an ongoing continuous social practice. Justice is an ongoing process. Second, it's collective and relational. It needs to be seen as an inherent part of our life world, and that it concerns everyone. This idea seeks to overcome this us and them dichotomy by recognizing that we're all implicated, albeit in different ways, in the conditions that produce injustice. And third, it's embodied. And so it acknowledges that justice must be felt and must be lived in concrete social and political practices, rather than remaining an abstract ideal. To understand what is involved in this lived sense of justice, it's helpful to engage once again with Lieder's phenomenology of embodiment. And we do so through this idea of this process, which he calls incorporation, which we think provides an interesting illustration of what we feel is involved in this idea. So incorporation, from the Latin corpus, means to bring within a body. And it describes how a person internalizes a new skill so it becomes part of their own corporeality. And in his work, Lieder uses this interesting example of the idea of learning how to swim as an example of incorporation. Right? And this allegory is very interesting to us because it shows how this process of incorporation is necessarily an effort which is painful and full of uncertainties, this idea of learning how to swim, of going into the water when you actually don't know yet how to deal with that new circumstance, uh, to us illustrates what's involved in this idea of acknowledging that justice is something that we're searching, but we don't actively yet know what it is, right? So this notion of incorporation for us can be used to provide the grounds for a rich dialectic, where the world transforms the body, even as the body transforms the world, inviting individuals to try and reshape the social reality. So this approach frames what we follow in Iris Marion Young called the call to be just as an ethical demand that comes from outside our current common sense, inviting us to plunge into the water and reshape our social realities. So the main conclusion of the book is that the promise of justice lies in cultivating a collective and processual sense of justice, which to us is inherently linked to notions of belonging. In this view, what unites us is not a shared identity as good citizens, but a shared longing for change and for a world where justice is no longer absent. Ultimately, the book argues that a comprehensive challenge to the violence of punishment requires us to face hurtful truths about our society and ourselves, moving away from the painkiller of hostility and towards a shared responsibility for building a just society. So since we finished the book, we have tried to move our work more from this critical analysis of punitive justice towards developing this idea of a lived sense of justice, right? So I just quickly wanted to highlight these two papers that we have produced in many ways as a direct response to the book. So one has already been published at the Journal of Critical Realism, which is Presenting Justice. And the other one is still a work in progress, hopefully being published very soon. And that is a collaboration that we have done with Drew Leader. After finishing the book, we reached out, given the clear contribution his work has made to ours. So I'll just very, very briefly just mention these papers, and I'm happy to talk about that more after during the questions, if that's of interest. So this presenting justice or presenting justice, it builds directly into the last chapter of the book on the lived sense of justice, and trying to move the inquiry from the embodied metaphor into a deeper ontological and ethical framework. Right? So we do that by engaging with some philosophical scholarships, especially around dialectics and dialectical critical realism, and especially with Elspeth Probin's fascinating work on belonging and her notion of outside belonging. So in this paper, what we mainly do is to engage philosophically with what it means to conceive of justice as a real absence in our social world, and how thinking dialectically about belonging can offer the grounds for a processual understanding of justice. And an interesting provocation in this paper, at least we find it interesting, is that is the suggestion that even though justice is a real absence, it doesn't mean that we can't identify concrete glimpses of a just future or hints of just practices. For instance, we briefly mentioned how Paulo Freire's critical pedagogy, which is the focus of some of our current and planned work, can offer some methodological orientations toward a lived sense of justice. So that's one of the papers, and the second one, which is called Making Room, tries to give a more practical illustration of a lived sense of justice by examining active, creative efforts within prisons to disrupt hostile carceral environments and replace them, even if temporarily and in a very situated and ongoing processual manner, with spaces that foster creativity, belonging, and solidarity. Right? So it tries to really develop this idea of a lived sense of justice as an active, collective, and embodied social practice, which the paper conceptualizes through this notion of justice work. So what it does is it engages with some geographical theories to understand space as lived and embodied, and then it applies these theories to practical examples of what we call this justice work within prisons. So some examples include philosophy discussion groups, lyrics writing courses, and some examples of art making by prisoners, both collectively and individually in their own cells. And we claim that these practices can be seen as informing or at least hinting at a kind of prefigurative politics, where people try to actualize a desired future through present practices of solidarity and belonging. So that's it from us. Hopefully this presentation managed to give a good idea of the work and hopefully of some of the possibilities that it might open up. And we very much welcome your comments and any questions. Thank you very much.